Recording by L. Huang, Bartleby the Scrivener, A Story of Wall Street. I am a rather elderly man. The nature of my avocations for the last 30 years has brought me into more than ordinary contact with what would seem an interesting and somewhat singular set of men, of whom as yet nothing that I know of has ever been written. I mean the law copyists or scriveners. I have known very many of them, professionally and privately, and if I please, could relate diverse histories, at which good-natured gentlemen might smile, and sentimentally so might sweep. But I waive the biographies of all other scriveners for a few pages in the life of Bartleby, who was a scrivener of the strangest I ever saw or heard of, while of other law copyists I might write the complete life. Of Bartleby, nothing of that sort can be done. I believe that no materials exist for a full and satisfactory biography of this man. It is an irreparable loss to literature. Bartleby was one of those beginnings of whom nothing is attainable, except from the original sources, and in his case, those are very small. What my own astonished eyes saw of Bartleby, that is all I know of him, except, indeed, one vague report which will appear in the school. Or introducing the scrivener, as he first appeared to me, it is fit I make some mention of myself, my employees, my business, my chambers, and general surroundings, because some such description is indispensable to an adequate understanding of the chief character about to be presented. In principes, I am a man who, from his youth upwards, has been filled with a profound conviction that the easiest way of life is the best. Hence, though I belong to a profession profitably energetic and nervous, even to turbulence at times, yet nothing of that sort have I ever suffered to invade my peace. I am one of those unambitious lawyers who never address to a jury, or in any way draws down public applause, but in the cool tranquillity of a sound retreat, do some business among rich men's bonds and mortgages and title deeds. All who know me consider me an eternity safe man. The late John Jacob Astor, a personage little given to a poetic enthusiasm, had no hesitation in pronouncing my first grand point to be prudence, my next method. I do not speak it in vanity, but simply record the fact that I was not employed in my profession by the late John Jacob Astor, a name which, I admit, I love to repeat, for it has a rounded and obscure sound to it, and rings like unto bullion. I will freely add that I was not insensible to be the late John Jacob Astor's good opinion. Some time prior to the period at which this little history begins, my avocations has been largely increased. The good old office, now extant in the state of New York, of a master in chemistry, had been conferred upon me. It was not a very adult's office, but very pleasantly remunerative. I seldom lose my temper, much more seldom indulge in dangerous indignation at wrongs and outrages. But I must be presented to be rash here and declare that I consider the sudden and violent abrogation of the office of Master in Chancery by the new Constitution as a prevent act, inasmuch as I had counted upon a life lease of the profits, whereas I only received loss of a few short years. But this is by the way. My chambers were upstairs at number Wall Street. At one end they look up the white wall of the interior of a spacious skylight shaft, penetrating the building from top to bottom. This view might have been considered rather tame than otherwise deficient in what landscape partners call life. But if so, the view from the other end of my chambers offered, at least, a contrast, if nothing more. In the direction my windows commanded an unobstructed view of a lofty brick wall, black by age and everlasting shade, which will require no spy glasses to bring out its lurking beauties, but for the benefit of all near-sighted spectators, was pushed up to within 10 feet of my window panes, owing to the great height of the surrounding buildings, and my chambers begin on the second floor. The interval between this wall and mine not a little resembled a huge square skeleton. At the period just preceding the advent of Bartleby, I had two persons as copyists in my employment, and a promising lad as my office boy. First, Turkey; second, Nippers; third, Ginger Nut. These may seem names, the like of which are not usually found in the directory. In truth, they were nicknames, mutually conferred upon each other by my three clerks, and were demanded expressly for their respective persons or characters. Turkey was a short, prosy Englishman of about my own age, that is, somewhere not far from 60. In the morning, one might say his face was of a fine phoebe hue, but after 12 o'clock, murdering his dinner hour, is blessed like a grate full of Christmas coals, and continue blessing, but as it were, with a gradual wane, till 6 o'clock p.m. or thereabouts, after which I saw no more of preafter of the face, which gaining its murdering with the sun, seemed to set with it, to rise, culminate, and decline the following day, with the sky like regularity and undiminished glory. There are many singular coincidences I have known in the course of my life, not the least among which was the fact, the exact when Turkey displayed his fullest beams from his red and radiant countenance. Just then, too, at that critical moment, began the daily period when I consider his business capacity a serious disturb for the remainder of the 24 hours. Not that he was absolutely ideal or averse to business men. Far from it. The difficulty was he was apt to look altogether energetic. There was a strange, inflamed, fluid, fiery recklessness of activity about him. He would be incautious in dipping his pen into his inkstand. All his blood upon my documents were dropped there after 12 o'clock. Meridian. Indeed, not only would he be reckless and sadly given to making blots in the afternoon, but some days he went further, and was rather noisy. At such times, too, his face flamed with argument, Blomsey, as if Colonel Cole had been heaped on advocacy. He made an unpleasant racket with his chair, spilled his stamp box, in mending his pens, impatiently split them all to pieces, and threw them on the floor in a sudden passion, stood up and leaned over his table, boxing his papers about in the most indesultory manners. Very sad to behold in an elderly man like him. Nevertheless, as he was in many ways a most valuable person to me, and all the time before 12 o'clock, Meridian was the quickest, steadiest creature too, accomplishing a great deal of work in a style not easy to be matched. For these reasons, I was willing to overlook his eccentricities, though indeed, occasionally, I remonstrated with him. I did this very gentle, however, because, though the civilest, nay, the bluntest and most reverential of men in the morning, yet in the afternoon he was disposed, upon provocations, to be slightly rash with his tongue, in fact, insolent. Now, valuing his morning service as I did, and resolved not to lose them, yet, at the same time made uncomfortable by his inflamed ways after 12 o'clock, and being a man of peace, unwilling by my admissions to call for some sincere result from him, I took upon me, one Saturday noon, he was always worse on Saturday, to hint him, very kindly, that perhaps, now that he was growing old, it might be well to abridge his labors. In short, he need not come to my chambers after 12 o'clock, but, dinner over, had best go home to his laundry and rest himself till tea time. But no, he insisted upon his afternoon devotions. His countenance became intolerably fluid, as he oratorically assured me, gesticulating with a long ruler at the other end of the room, that is, his services in the morning were awful. How indispensable, then, in the afternoon! With submission, sir, said Turkey on the occasion, I consider myself your right-hand man. In the morning, I but marshal and deploy my clumps, but in the evening, I put myself at the head, and gently urge the force. Thus, he made a violent throttle with the ruler. But the ballad Turkey intimated I. True, but with a submission, sir. Behold these hairs. I'm getting old, surely, sir. A blot of two of a warm afternoon is not to be suffraged against gray hairs. Old age, even if blot the page, is honorable. With submission, sir, we both getting old. This appeal to my fellow feelings was hardly to be resisted. At all events, I saw that go he would not, so I made up my mind to let him stay, resolving nevertheless to see to it that during the afternoon he had to do with my less important papers. Nippers, the second of my list, was a whiskered, sallow, and upon the whole rather piratical-looking young man of about 25. I always deemed him the victim of two evil powers, ambition and indigestion. The ambition was evinced by a certain impatience of the duties of a mere copyist, an unwarrantable usurpation of strictly professional affairs, such as the original drawing up of legal documents. The indigestion seemed back-knotted in the occasion nervous tenseness and grinning irritably, causing the teeth to audibly grin together over mistakes committed in copying, unnecessary maledictions, hissed rather than spoken in the heat of business, and especially by a continual discontent with the height of the table where he worked. Though of a very industrious mechanical turn, Nippers could never get this table to suit him. He put chips under it, blocks of various sorts, bits of pasteboard, and at last went so far as to attempt to an exquisite adjustment by final pieces of folded blotting paper. But no invention would answer, if, for the sake of easing his back, he brought the table lid at a sharp angle, well up toward his chin, and wrote there like a man using a steep roof of a Dutch house for his desk. Then he declared that it stopped the circumstance in his arms. If now he lowered the table to his waistbands and stopped it over it in writing, then there was a sore itching in his back. In short, the truth of the matter was, Nippers knew not what he wanted, or if he wanted anything, it was to be rid of the scrivener's table altogether. Among the manufacturers of his diseased ambition was unfounded. He had for receiving visits from certain ambiguous-looking fellows in seedy coats, whom he called his clients. Indeed, I was aware that not only was he, at times, considerably of a ward politician, but he occasionally did a little business at the justice courts, and was not unknown on the step of Tom's. I have good reason to believe, however, that one individual who called upon him at my chambers, and who, with a grand air, he insisted was his client, was no other than a Don, and the aged titled it a bill, but with all his failings, and the annoyance he caused me. Nippers, like his competitor Turkey, was a very useful man to me, wrote a neat, swift hand, and, when he chose, was not deficient in a gentlemanly sort of deportment. Added to this, he always decreased in a gentlemanly sort of way, and so, incidentally, reflected credit upon my chambers, whereas with respect to Turkey, I have much ado to keep him from being a reproach to me. His clothes were apt to look only in a smile of eating houses. He wore his pantaloons very loose and baggy in summer. His coat wore assembly, and his head not to be handled. But while the head was a thing of indifferences to me, inasmuch as his natural civility and differences, as a dependent Englishman, always led him to Jove, it to the moment of entering the room. Yet his coat was another matter. Concerning his coat, I reasoned with him, but with no effect. The truth was, I suppose, that a man of all small income could not afford to support such a lusted face and lustrous coat at one and the same time, as Nippers could offer serve. Turkey's money went chiefly far for red ink. One writer's day I present Turkey with a highly respected-looking coat of my own, a padded greatcoat of a most comfortable warmth, and which buttons stared up from the knee to the neck. I thought Turkey would appreciate the favor and abet his rashness and obturousness of afternoons. But no, I verily believe that buttoning himself up in so dawning and blanket-like a coat had a personage effect upon him, upon the same principle that too much oats are bad for horses. In fact, precisely as a rush with death, horses said to feel is hot. So, Turkey felt his heart. It made him insolent. He was a man whom prospectly harmed, though, concerning the self-indulgent habits of Turkey, I had my own private surmise. Yet, touching Nippers, I was well perceived that whatever might be his fault in other respects, he was, at least, a temperate young man. But, indeed, nature herself seemed to be in a very winter, and at his birth charged him so thoroughly with an irritable, brandy-like disposition, that all subsequent protections were needless. When I consider how, amid the stillness of my chambers, Nippers would sometimes impatiently rise from the seat, and stoop over his table, spread his arm wide apart, seize the whole desk, and move it and jerk it with a grinding motion on the floor, as if the table were preserved volunteer agent, intent on threatening and vexing him, I plainly perceived that for Nippers, brandy and water are altogether profitless. It was fortunate for me that, owing to this peculiar course indigestions, the irritability and consequent nervousness of Nippers were mainly observable in the morning, while in the afternoon he was comparatively mild, so that Turkey paroxysm only coming on about 12 o'clock, I never had to do with their at one time. Their fits relieve each other like guards. When Nippers was on, Turkey was off, and vice versa. This was a good-natured arrangement under the circumstances. Ginger Nut, the third of my list, was a lad some 12 years old. His father was a carman, ambitious of seeing him, his son, on the bench instead of a cart, before he died. So he sent him to my office as a student at law. Errand boy, and clearer and sweeter, at the rate of $1 a week. He had a little desk to himself, but he did not use it much. Upon inspections, the drawer is heaped a great array of the shells of very soft of nuts. Indeed, to his quick-witted use of the whole noble science of the law was contained in a nutshell, not the least among employment or ginger nut, as well as one which discharged with the most scholarly was his duty as cake and apple for turkey and nippers. Carving and law papers became profitable dry. Husky sort of business. My two scriveners were fain to moisten their mouths very often with stimpigers to be had at the numbers, Stara Night and Custom House and Post Office. Also, they sent ginger nuts very frequently for the particular cake, small, flat, round, and very spicy, after which he had been named by them. Of a cold morning, when business was but full, Turkey would gulp it up scores of these cakes, and if they were mere wafers, indeed they all them sell at the rate of 6 or 8 for the penny. The scrape of his pen blended with the crunching of the crisp practical in his mouth. Of all the furry afternoon broodings and floating riches of Turkey, was his once moistening a ginger cake between his lips and clapping it on to a mortgage for sale. I came within an ace of dismissing him then, but they moistened him by making an oriental bow, and saying, "With submission, sir, it was generous of me to find you in such finery on my own account." Now, my original business, that the conveyancer and title hunted and drawer up of recondite documents of all sorts, was considerably increased by receiving the master's office. There was now great work with sovereigns. Not only must I push the clerk already with me, but I must have additional help. In answer to my advertisement, the motionless young man one morning stood up my office lattice head. The door began open, for it was summer. I can see that figure now, perfectly neat, respectable, incurable phony. It was Bartleby. After a few words touching his qualifications, I engaged him, glad to have among my crops and copies a man of so singular stand and aspect, which I thought might operate beneficially upon the fluttering temper of Turkey and the furry one of nippers. I should have stated before that grounded glass floated door divided my permissions into two parts, one of which was occupied by my sovereigns, the other by myself. According to my honor humor, I threw open these doors, or closed them. I resolved my assign Bartleby a corner by folding door, but on one side of them, so as to have this quiet man within his call. In case of streaming thing was to be done, I placed his desk close upon the small side window in the part of the room, a window which originally had afforded a lateral view of a certain grimy backyard of bricks, but which, owing to subsequent erections, commanded present no view at all, though it gave no sunlight. Within 3 feet of the panes a wall, and the light came down from the far above, between two lofty buildings, as far a very small opening in the dawn. Still further to a satisfactory arrangement, I perceived a high green folding screen, which might entirely isolate Bartleby from my sight, though not remove him from my voice, and thus, in a manner, privacy and subtlety were conjoined. At first, Bartleby did the extraordinary quality of writing, as if long flashing for something to copy, He seemed to gorge himself on documents. There was no pause for discussions. He ran a day and night line, copying in sunlight and by candlelight. I should have been quite delighted with his application, had been very truthfully industrious, but he wrote a slightly painfully mechanically. It is, of course, an indispensable part of a surveyor's business to verify the accuracy of his copy, word by word. Where there are 2 or more surveyors in my office, they assist each other in the examination, one reading from copy, the other holding the original. It is a very dull, wearisome, and listening affair. I can readily imagine that to some sanguine temperaments it would be altogether intolerable. For example, I cannot credit that the mentalism part Barney would have considered sat down with Bartleby to examine the law document of, say, 500 pages, closely written in a crispy hand. Now and then, in the haste of business, it had been my habit to assist in comparing some brief document to myself, calling turkey of nipper for his purpose. One object I have in placing Bartleby so handy to be handed behind the screen was to avail myself of the service of such trivial occasions. It was on the 3rd day, I think, of his beginning with me, and before any necessity had arisen for having his own writing examined, that, being much hurried to complete the small affair I had in hand, I abruptly called to Bartleby. In my hostile and natural expectation of instant compliance, I sat with my head bent over the original on my desk, and my right hand sideways, and somewhat nervously extended with a copy, so that immediately upon the emerging from this written, Bartleby might stanch it, and proceed to be business without least delays. In this very attitude did I sit when I called him, rapidly setting with it what I wanted him to do, namely, to examine a very small paper with me. Imagine my surprise, nay, my consolation, when without moving from his privacy, Bartleby, in a singularly mild, firm voice, replied, "I would prefer not to." I sat a while in a perfect silence, really my sounding fallacies. Immediately it occurred to me that my ears had deceived me, or Bartleby had entirely misunderstood my meaning. I repeated my request in the clearest tone I could assume, but inquired as clear as one can previously reply, "I would prefer not to." "Prefer not to?" echoed I, rising in high excitement and crossing the room with a stride. "What do you mean? Are you moonstruck? I want you to help me compare this sheet here. Take it!" And I thrust it toward him. "I would prefer not to," he said. I looked at him unsteadily. His face was lean composed, his grey eye dimed calm, not a wrinkle of red in him. Had there been the least uneasiness, anger, impatience, or impotence in his manner, in other words, had there been anything ordinarily human about him, doubtless I should have violently dismissed him for the premise. But as it was, I should have as soon thought of turning my pale practice of Pear's burst of courage of doors. I stood gazed at him a while, as he went on with his own writing, and then reseated myself at desk. This is very strange, though, I think. What had one best do? But my business hurried me. I concluded to forget the matter of the present, reserving it for my future lecture. So I called Nippers from the other room, and the paper was speedily examined. A few days after this, Bartleby concluded 4 lengthy documents, begin quadruples of a weak testament taken before me in my High Court of Chancery. It became necessary to examine them. It was an important suit, and great accuracy was imperative. Having all things arranged, I called Turkey, Nippers, and Ginger Nut from the next room, meaning to place the 4 copies in hands of all my clerks, while I should read from the original. Accordingly, Turkey, Nippers, and Ginger Nut had taken their seat in a row, each with his documents in hand. When I called to Bartleby to join the interest group, Bartleby, "Quick! I'm waiting!" I heard the slow scrub of his chair legs on the unscraped floor, and soon he appeared standing at the entrance of the hermitage. "What is wanted?" he said mildly. The copies, I said hurriedly. "We are going to examine them. There!" And I held toward him the 4th quadruplet. "I would prefer not to," he said, and gently disappeared behind the screen. For a few moments I was turned into a pillar of salt, standing at the head of my state clerk. Recovering myself, I advanced towards the screen, and demanded the reason for such extraordinary conduct. "Why did you refuse?" "I would prefer not to." With any other man I should have flown outright into the dreadful passion, scorned all further words, and thrust him ignorantly from my presence. But there was something about Bartleby that not only strangely dismayed me, but in a wonderful manner touched and disconcerted me. I began a reason with him. "These are your own copies we are about to examine. It is labor-saving to you, because one examination will answer for you 4 papers. It is common usage. Every copyist is bound to help examine his copy. It is not so. Will you not speak? Answer!" "I prefer not to," he replied in a fluent, light tone. It seemed to me that while I had been addressing him, he carefully revolved every statement that I made, fully comprehendable the meaning, could not guarantee the irresistible conclusions, but at the same time some paramount consideration prevailed with him to reply as he did. "You are decided, then, not to comply with my request, a request made according to a common usage of common sense?" He briefly gave me the understood that point my judgment was sound. Yes, his decision was irrevocable. It is not seldom the case that when a man is browbeaten in some unprecedented and wildly unreasonable way, he begins to stagger in his own plain faith. He begins, as it were, vaguely to summarize that, wonderful as it would be, all the justice and all the reason is on the other side. Accordingly, if any distinct person are presented, he turns to for some reinforcement for his own floating mind. "Turkey," I say, "what do you think of this? Am I not right?" "With submission, sir," said Turkey, with the blandest tone, "I think that you are." "Nippers," said I, "what do you think of it?" "I think I should kick him out of the office." The reader of the night's presentation will here perceive that it began running. Turkey's answer is couched in polite and talkative terms, but Nipper's reply is still temperate ones. Or, to repeat a previous sentence, Nipper's ugly mood was on duty and Turkey's off. Ginger Nut, I said, willing to enlist the smallest suffrage in my behalf. What do you think of it? I think, sir, he's a little nonny, replied Ginger Nut with a grin. You hear what they say, said I, turning toward to the screen. Come forth and do your duty. But the negative no replied. I pondered a moment in the sobriety, but one small business hurried me. I determined again to postpone the consideration of his dilemma to my future leisure. With a little trouble, we met to examine the paper without Bartleby, though every page or two, Turkey defiantly dropped his opinion that his proceeding was quite out of the common, while Nippers, twitching his chair with a stately nervousness, ground out between his set teeth, occasionally his immediately, against the stubborn off behind the screen. And for his Nippers' part, this was the first and the last time he would do another man's business without pay. Meanwhile, Bartleby sat in his heritage, oblivious to everything but his own peculiar business here. Some day passed. The scrivener became employed upon another length of work. His remarkable conduct led me to regard it his way narrowly. Observe that he never went to dinner, indeed, that he never went anywhere, and yet I had never of my personal knowledge known him to be outside of my office. He was perpetual central in the corner. At about 11 o'clock in the morning, I noticed that Ginger Nut would advance toward the opening in Bartleby's screen, as if silently back-fronted, throwing by a gesture invisible to me where I sat. The boy would then leave the office jingling a few pence, and reappear with a handful of ginger nuts which I delivered in the heritage man, receiving 2 of the cake from his trouble. He lives, then, on ginger nut, though I never ate a dinner, properly speaking. He must be a vegetarian then, but no, he never eats even vegetables. He eats nothing but ginger nuts. My mind then ran on in reserve concerning that the problem effects upon the human constitution of living entirely of ginger nuts. Ginger nuts are so called because they contain ginger as one of their particular constituents, and the final flavoring one. Now, what was ginger? A hot, spicy thing. Was Bartleby hot and spicy? Not at all. Ginger then had no effect upon Bartleby. Probably he preferred it should have none. Nothing so aggressive and earnest person as passive resistance. If the individual so resists be of a non-inhuman temper, and the resisting of perfectly harmless in his passivity, then in the better mood of the former, he will invariably to construct to his imagination what proved impossible to be solved by his judgment. Even so, for the most part, I regarded Bartleby and his ways, poor fellow though he means no mischief. It is plain he intended no insolence. He expects sufficiently evidence that his eccentricities are involuntary. He is useful to me. I can get along with him. If I turn him away, the chances are he will fall in with some less indulgent employer, and then he will be rudely treated, and perhaps driven forth miserable to starve. Yes, here I can cheaply purchase a delicious self-approval to briefly Bartleby, to humor him in his stunted willfulness, will cost me a little or nothing, while I lay out in my soul what will eventually prove a sweet morsel for my coincidence. But in the mood I was invariable with me, The passiveness of Bartleby sometimes irritated me. I felt strangely goaded on encountering him in a new opposition, to elicit some angry spark from him, answerable to my own. But indeed, I might as well have my aces strike fire with my knuckles against a bit of window strip. But one afternoon the evil impulse mastered me, and the following little scene ensued. "Bartleby," said I, "when those papers are all copied, I will compare them with you." "I would prefer not to." "How? Surely you do not mean to persist in that mutual victory?" No answer. I threw open the folding door nearby, and turning upon Turkey and Nippers, exclaimed in an excited manner, "He says, a second time, he won't examine his papers. What do you think of it, Turkey?" It was afternoon, but I remembered Turkey sat glowing like a brass boiler, his bald head steaming, his hands reading among his bottle papers. "Think of it?" roared Turkey. "I think I'll just step behind his screen and take his eyes from him." So saying, Turkey rose his feet and threw his arms in a polygamous position. He was hurrying away to make good his promise when I detained him, alarmed at the effect of incautious roasted Turkey's compassion after dinner. "Sit down, Turkey," said I, "and hear what Nippers say." "What do you think of it, Nippers? Would I not to be justified in immediately dismissing Bartleby?" "Excuse me, that is for you to decide, sir. I think his conduct quite unusual, and indeed unjust, as regards Turkey and myself, but it may only be a passive wisdom." "Bartleby the Scrivener!" "Oh," exclaimed I, "you have strangely changed your mind then. You speak very gently of him now." "Oh, dear," cried Turkey, "gentleness is a fact